going. I'm one of those annoying professors who starts class on time. Okay, wow, what a great turnout. Welcome to the University of California, Santa Cruz Center for Computational Experiences virtual panel. I'm Catherine Isbister, I'm the director of the center, and we're excited to have you here for tonight's topic, which is serious games. So before we get started, I wanted to say just a little bit about the center. We've been around UC Santa Cruz for about 10 years now, actually, and we innovate technology practices and platforms to enhance everyday lived human experience. And we draw upon the unique strengths and sensibilities of UC Santa Cruz, including a deep concern for well-being and social good, closeness to and respect for the natural world, and technological skill. The center actually got started with a focus on games and playable media, and you'll see that in the panel tonight. Our researchers focused on serious games and the incredibly valuable contributions that they can make. But the center's mission also encompasses a broad range of computationally enabled activities, and I encourage you to, if you get a chance, take a look at our website, and I'm going to paste the URL into the chat so you can do that at your leisure. Okay. Oh, I saw a raised hand. Is that hand still raised? No. Okay. All right. So before we dive into the program, just a couple of logistical notes. You can type questions into the text chat, or you can also type them into Q&A, and Jonathan, who is the center's administrator, and myself will keep an eye on those questions. We'll make sure that we get to your questions. Each of the panelists is going to give a pretty short presentation. It's kind of an overview of the kind of things they do. And you're welcome to ask a couple of questions after their presentation, but after the three presenters, we'll also have a good amount of time to have more conversation about all this work and serious games research in general. Okay, so let's get started with the panelist talks. First, I am delighted to introduce Eddie Melcer. He is an assistant professor here at UC Santa Cruz, and he's located at our Silicon Valley campus, where he teaches serious games, game design, and human-computer interaction courses. He's the director of the Alternative Learning Technologies and Games Lab, which he calls Alt Games. And he's going to be speaking today about a really cool project looking at interactive narrative to teach ethics, moral reasoning, and other skills. So please take it away, Eddie.
Wonderful. Thank you for the introduction, Catherine. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. Great. So yeah, it's wonderful, exciting to be talking here. I'm going to be talking today about one of the projects from my lab that we're doing in collaboration actually with some other folks at UCSC on the main campus. Talking about training the next generation of researchers and how we're really using interactive narrative to teach responsible conduct of research. And so sort of jumping into this to just kind of start, I want to say that just serious games are an incredibly broad topic. They can be used in so many different contexts and applications, ranging from like businesses training their employees, like the McDonald's training simulator, to therapy games, which actually one of our other panelists will be talking about some of the work in their lab around these kinds of things, educational games, which Magy and Chaima will be talking about, games for health. We could companies even use them for advertisement, empathy, persuasion. There's so many different ways conveying news that we can really talk about and think about serious games. And so in my game, the Alt Games Lab, we actually kind of do the whole gamut of range of things. We focus more on education and health, but we really go from traditional games, like games teaching you how to write kanji or program, to more experimental games, like using augmented reality to train collaborative skills, or a 3D printer to real-time fabricate tangibles to help you learn, these types of things. But what I'm going to focus on today is actually my work in this space, focusing on interactive narratives for education. And really specifically this project and game called Academical that I'm doing in collaboration with Noah Wardrip-Fruin, and his lab, the Expressive Intelligence Studio over on the main campus, and my wonderful postdoc Katie, and a bunch of other folks that we've kind of cobbled together to make a really awesome super team. And so really with this project, we were looking at, could a choice-based interactive storytelling game, improve engagement, knowledge, more reasoning skills, and attitudes towards responsible conduct of research. And that's actually a really, really crucial skill for us as researchers. And I think the general public, most people have heard about many of these experiments gone horribly wrong, like the Stanford prison experiments, where they actually locked students up in a mini jail, to faking electric shock and pain, to torturing animals, to all sorts of really unethical experiments, and really there's an importance to understand, how do we conduct our research responsibly. And that actually extends just beyond academia to industry at large. There's so many issues around AI and data collection that we could spend hours talking about. I think the Facebook unethical experiment about manipulating its users' emotions without asking them made the news quite a bit a few years back. So we see that this problem extends beyond just researchers to really, engineers, people, the public in general. Everyone really should know how to kind of conduct these sorts of things responsibly. But it turns out that's not easy to do. There's a lot of challenges with teaching responsible conduct of research. That's actually a really complex topic, and ethical decision-making is not an easy thing to learn. It requires you to understand a variety of perspectives. And I think this is probably one of the biggest issues, is that most RCR training tools really kind of have a notable lack of engagement and motivation to teach you. And kind of just to highlight that point, this is what most existing RCR education tools look like. You go to a website, you get a big wall of text, and maybe if you're lucky, a couple pictures. So what we did is we actually set out to build this game called Academical, which is an interactive storytelling game. It's choice-based, so we put you in ethical scenarios, we let you make decisions and see what happens. And we had 9 unique scenarios sort of covering each core RCR topic that's key identified by the National Institute of Health. And kind of crucial to this game is that we actually let people and have the game make you play through the same scenario multiple times from different perspectives. So you'll play as, the advisor or the student and a different type of stakeholder, those types of things, so that you can understand everyone's perspectives involved. And so just to kind of illustrate a little bit how this works, here's one scenario and just a couple of shots from it of Academical. This one's teaching about the IRB and the importance of actually communicating with them and not running studies before getting approval. And so this is one where you would actually play, and you start as the advisor, and you kind of get some flavor text. You understand, like, he's doing this for a colleague. He doesn't know a ton about the IRB, so he's not sure of all the processes, things like that. You get to make different sorts of decisions. So you can say, like, yeah, let's push ahead, or let's wait and actually check with the IRB, those types of things. And eventually you can either end with a good or bad ending. If you end with the bad one, you got to replay it again to figure out the good ending. There's different levels of good. So the advisor could tell you, but that's maybe not the best person if he's not familiar with the practices. Really directing to the right IRB person is important. And so the other perspective then usually play through as a grad student, and you get to see, like, all the pressures that a grad student might go through, right? It's his advisor told him to do it. It's not his research. He just wants to get it over with. It's wasting his summer or spring break, these types of things. And so you make more decisions and eventually, end with a good or bad scenario. Once you get a good scenario, you can move on to the next topic. And so we actually had a lot of different hypotheses about, an approach like this, using interactive narrative for education. That would be more engaging, just, more graphics, less text, fun interactivity, be as effective at training these RCR content, help you actually develop stronger moral reasoning skills, because you're actually kind of role playing and making decisions and seeing what happens. And that it would improve your attitudes towards RCR. So you'd understand more it's important and why it's important. And so the first thing we did is we actually did it between subject studies. So we actually compared the game to what is used actually currently at the University of Utah in their medical health departments to train responsible conduct of research. And we just kind of compared the two instruments. We looked at engagement, their knowledge outcomes, specifically for like peer review and authorship, just because covering all the RCR topics in one experiment would be very exhausting for the participants. And then we also actually evaluated their moral reasoning skills to see if they're able to analyze a problem, consider the different viewpoints involved in that problem, and propose different solutions. Really the three kind of core aspects of being able to, evoke these moral reasoning skills. And so we ran it with 28 graduate students, 14 in each group. And we got really, really exciting results. So we saw that using this type of game was, in fact, much more engaging for participants. It also had either statistically better or the same educational outcomes, so same amount of knowledge gained or even better in some cases. And this was the really, really exciting one, is that it actually showed improvement in moral reasoning, not in each individual subcategory and overall, there were overall moral reasoning scores, which is really great because we've never actually seen this in an interactive narrative context. We've seen this in a narrative context. So showing that it kind of extends this type of interactive narrative game is really exciting, and that this type of tool can be used to help with moral reasoning skills. So then we also wanted to look at attitudes. So we ran a second study where we just did within and looked at people's engagement and attitudes before and after. And saw that participants actually scored significantly higher overall for all RCR attitudes and questions. So basically, we found that the game was really effective also in improving their attitudes. And actually most exciting was that this correlated strongly with engagement. So people were maybe the engagement level that they had and their attitudes beforehand did not relate. But once they played the game, the more engaged with the game they were, the better their attitudes were afterwards, and the more their change in attitudes were better. And so this was actually a really, really important outcome, and shows that like using serious games, interactive narrative, these types of things that can improve engagement can have a really huge effect on outcomes about RCR and attitudes. And so overall, this really just shows a really great improvement over existing RCR tools in a bunch of different ways. And there's a lot of stuff to look at moving forward. So thinking about like how you can evoke character attachment and relatedness. So, how can we make it more engaging? Can we let the player really relate themselves to the character by customizing their avatar and the character they're playing as, so it looks more like them or feels more like them? These types of things are a bunch of stuff that we can really explore. And so lastly, I just wanted to say thank you to all of the fantastic folks in my Alt Games Lab, of which none of this research would be possible without. And with that, I'll conclude. And if you have any questions or things in the future, we'll have the discussion afterwards, and you're welcome to contact me as well.
That was fantastic, Eddie. I saw you already had a couple of questions in the chat. One was a little earlier was, is ORCA aware of this game? Is the Human Subjects Board at UC Santa Cruz aware of it?
I actually am not entirely sure if ORCA is. The grad division actually sponsored this game to some extent. So they have been pushing it. We haven't talked to ORCA yet about integrating it, but I think that would be a really nice next step.
Looks like you have an offer to help with that from Jeffrey Weekly. And
Awesome.
then another person asks, is Academical available for use?
Yes, so we do have a link that it's publicly available. We're still kind of putting together a website to broadcast it more widely, but I'm happy to share the link to play it if people are interested or want to use it.
Nice. So if you get a chance, maybe paste it into the chat just so attendees can grab that. Here's a question from Flynn. Was there any consideration of how playing from certain perspectives first impacted results? Yeah,
that was definitely a consideration of, do we randomize this? Do we think about that? And which perspectives? And we sort of picked the ones we thought were the highest priority, but a lot of that is just sort of caveats in, there's only so much we can do with a study. And that would definitely be an interesting future thing to explore, I think.
Nice. Okay, well, great. If people have other questions, they can definitely bring them up at the tail end after all the panelists have spoken. Meanwhile, let's go on to the next presenters, who are UC Santa Cruz Professor Magy Seif El-Nasr and Northeastern University PhD candidate Chaima Jemmali. Dr. Seif El-Nasr is the vice chair of our Serious Games program and has a deep expertise in the area of serious games research. And she's worked together with Jemmali on the project they'll present this afternoon. So please go ahead and share your slides and let's get started. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and thank you all for coming. So me and Chaima are going to be tag teaming this presentation. So she's driving, and I'm going to tell her when to when to click next. So can we go to the next slide? Okay, so first I wanted to introduce myself, given Catherine's great introduction. So I kind of wear different hats. I'm the vice chair of the Serious Games program, where we basically focus on the design and development of serious games for multiple different applications, including education, health, and others. And you saw a great example from Eddie. Next slide, please. And then another kind of hat, I also worked with a lot of different serious game companies. So some of these companies are indie companies focusing on education, and some on behavior change for health or for training. And I've even worked with some companies that are interested in innovating using serious games. So they may not be in a serious game space, but they wanted to basically add in a serious game component. And through these projects, we're basically looking at different, no, go back, yeah. So through these projects, we're basically going through different design and development processes. And you've seen an example from Eddie's talk, and you'll see another example of different design techniques from Chaima as she talks about Mazy's journey. But basically the idea is that there are different types of design methods, including data-driven design, theory-based design, as well as co-design with your participants, because most of the time you're building serious games for an audience. So understanding the audience and working with the audience can also be another method that you could use in the design process. So in this talk, we'd be discussing Mazy's journey, which is basically a game that is engaging people to learn about programming, and is basically the vision of Chaima, which is why she'd be talking more about it. This game was funded by NSF, and there's a lot of different people that are involved, just like as any serious game project. There's a lot of people involved in the development process, the design process, the research, even giving us expertise about learning science. In this particular case, we're working with Edge at Turk, which is a company specifically looking at learning sciences and education. And we're working with them where they are basically helping us shape the research around Mazy's journey, which we'll be talking about next. So now Chaima is going to be taking it on from here to discuss more about Mazy's journey.
Thank you, Maggie, for the introduction. So Mazy's Journey is a 3D puzzle, narrative puzzle game where players are tasked to help the main character, May, navigate the broken game world. The game world is made of code, and now that that code is broken and players need to program their way through to progress and discover the mysteries behind this world. Players alternate between exploration and puzzle solving. There are over 50 levels so far in the game, and players start with very simple instruction of moving blocks around and rotating blocks, and then they go on to learn about variables, arrays, even array manipulations, for loops, while loops, etc. In the exploration phase, players can talk to different NPCs, meet companions that will go with them throughout the game. They will discover secret rooms, collect different kind of objects, crystals, etc., and try to uncover the narrative of the game. In the programming side of the game, we introduce programming in 3 different ways. The first way is players need to write code from scratch. So in this case, they will need to move these 3 statues to light all the fires to be able to access the key. In other cases, players have code written for them, but they cannot interact with it. So instead, they need to provide the correct input or change the elements of the environments to be able to get the correct output from the code. Finally, players are sometimes given partial code and need to fill in the blanks. So we use also these last 2 methods when we want to introduce new concepts to the players. Additionally, the player has on-demand help and documentation. So there are two types of help: code related in the form of suggestions from error messages to help the debugging process, and then puzzle related in the form of highlighting objects that they need to interact with or adding hints about the puzzle. Additionally, the latest construct that they learned will appear at the bottom left of the screen with examples of how to use it. And then more information is found for each construct learned so far, with a description, a correct way of how to use it, and a wrong example inspired from common errors we have observed. So far, we have collected a total of 717 played sessions over the course of 2 years, collected from different schools and clubs. And here are the schools that we collaborated with. For our data analysis, we used different approaches. So we looked at the data quantitatively, looking at playtime, levels solved, numbers of errors, or distribution of errors. We also looked at the data qualitatively using a playback tool developed by Edge at Turk, where we can watch all the playback of the players and actually label it to look at how they're debugging, for example. Then we also looked at mixed method analyses, looking at sequence analyses and visualizations, where we look at the sequences and then researchers try to look at patterns through these visualizations. So our data analysis workflow is as follows. So first we have the game logs, where we log all the actions and events, which we both will feed into either the labeling system, where humans will label the debugging process of each player in each level, or into data abstractions, where we abstract the data into different state action representations, which we then either visualize through our glyph tool to look at patterns and individual differences, or look at kind of prediction models and clustering our players through machine learning techniques. All these will feed into trying to look at how players are learning through patterns, and also how are they learning differently. And currently our recent study will include interviews where we could reinforce our findings about the patterns, and also try to fine-tune and revise our labeling and our abstractions. So the current work and study, we will have players play for at least 1 hour, where then after that, a researcher will look at their playback to find places where we want to ask students questions about. So if the players have played, we will just ask them questions about their playback. And if they haven't finished the whole game, we will ask them to play out loud where they've left out, and asking them questions about their problem solving. So the idea is we want them to know how they get to learn difficult computer science constructs, and how do they get through the frustration of like having to debug over and over. And another project we're working on is creating a grammar-based level generator, where we start from a solution code and we provide levels that can be solved with that code. The idea is to give players more practice levels between the pre-designed levels, so that they can move on to the next construct only when they have mastered the previous constructs. We can also give them levels where they can practice debugging with specific error messages. With that, I want to thank everyone. And if anyone is interested, you can check out the game and check out our websites for also more research about this. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you. Maybe you can also, if you think of it, paste just the URL for the game into the chat so people can follow up. Are there any questions from the attendees about this? Let me see. I see there's a Q&A question. From Kez May, what existing educational programming games informed your technical design for this game? I'm teaching my 10-year-old niece to code and she's absolutely addicted, does it instead of homework.
So I think most of the inspiration comes from Code Combat. So I think that's the closest to what Maze Journey does, but we tried to make it more like, instead of being level after level, we tried to embed the gameplay within the story and have it more like feel like a game. So I also looked at a lot of like what other schools like, or how computer science is introduced in general, and how break it down into small concepts, and what do they need to learn before they get to different concepts, and try to introduce only one concept at a time to try to not overload them with a lot of things to learn at a time.
Nice. All right, looks like we've got the URL for the game in the chat if anybody wants to go and have a look. So I think, thank you for that. I think we're going to move on to our final panelists, Sri Kurniawan and Tiffany Thang. So Ms. Thang is a PhD candidate in computational media who's working with Professor Sri Kurniawan, who's the director of the ASSIST Lab, which stands for Assistive Socio-Technical Systems for Individuals with Special Needs Using Technology. And Dr. Kurniawan's also the chair of UC Santa Cruz's Computational Media Department, within which all of our games programs sit. Together, they're going to present their work on therapy games. So welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Catherine. So yeah, I'm kind of like wearing two hats as well. First, as department chair, as Catherine already said, Department of Computational Media hosts two professional games degree, games and playable media, as well as serious games at our UCSC Silicon Valley campus. And starting fall 2021, we will have the third professional masters, which is professional masters in HCI. So super exciting. And then my second hat, obviously, is as the director of the ASSIST Lab. And basically what the lab does, as the name implies, it's a human-centered games and virtual reality. We deal with a lot of multimodal virtual reality for health, well-being, and rehabilitation, especially for older adults, people with disabilities, and people from low socioeconomic and educational background, including people from third world countries. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Tiffany to talk about one of the virtual reality projects that is happening in the lab, the super exciting one. So Tiffany, the stage is yours.
Thanks so much, Sri. Hi, everyone. Today I'll be talking about our work in the ASSIST Lab regarding 360-degree video-based VR games for SCC skill training with adults with ASD. So let's begin by talking about autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. So ASD is a developmental disability affecting about 1 in 59 people in the United States. And it's often characterized by the impairment of social, emotional, and communication skills, otherwise referred to as SEC skills. These skills play an important role in our ability to recognize emotions, manage and communicate our feelings, and appropriately interact with others. SEC skills are crucial in helping us develop long-lasting and meaningful relationships with others, which is why it's important for individuals with ASD to receive assistance with learning and strengthening these skills. Typically, children with ASD will receive behavioral services from their schools, behavioral specialists, or special programs for children with ASD. But as they grow older, these resources gradually stop becoming available to them. This raises an issue as the transition to adulthood presents many changes with respect to social norms and SEC skills, leaving these individuals without assistance in navigating these changes. Adults with ASD may seek out services from a behavioral professional on their own, but these services can cost up to $80,000 a year. In addition to this, programs for adults with ASD often only have the resources to accommodate for a small number of clients, leaving some individuals on a long waiting list or without any assistance at all. Our work on 360-degree video-based VR games for SEC skill training aims to provide a solution exploring how VR can increase access to this type of care. So 360-degree video-based VR games are similar to that of VR games you would normally encounter on the App Store or on Steam, where an immersive environment is presented to you through the use of a headset like the HTC Vive or the Oculus Quest. However, with 360-degree video-based VR, instead of seeing a 3D modeled environment, you will instead see a video recording of the real world. When viewing this through the headset, the experience is similar to that of being present in the real-world environment that the video was filmed in. The development of these types of games involves recording scenes with 360-degree video cameras, like the Samsung Gear VR camera, shown in this picture on the left. And the resulting film is modified to create the VR environment. While the process is pretty straightforward, it's noted that some issues arise with this type of work, including issues with video warping at the extreme points of the film, shown in the two photographs on the right. We chose this form of VR due to its ability to be quickly produced, as 3D modeling environments and people takes a good amount of time, and because it allows for SEC skill training to occur with real people who can portray the nuances of emotional and social expressions more accurately than a 3D model. So now I'll move on to discussing the games that we've created in collaboration with Hope Services, a local community center that provides SEC skill training and additional services to adults with ASD and other developmental disabilities. We've worked closely with behavioral professionals, staff, and members of Hope Services in creating games that address their SEC skill needs. Journey to Recognition was our first 360-degree video-based VR game aimed at helping adults with ASD in understanding how to recognize emotions using emotional cues and contextual clues. The game included users in a series of scenarios that they might encounter in real life, such as a job interview or a meal with friends, and had them practice identifying emotions of the characters presented to them. The next game we developed is Pro Social, which is a choose-your-own-adventure style 360-degree video-based VR game aimed at helping adults with ASD in understanding social consequences and how their actions might affect others. In this game, adults with ASD are immersed in social scenarios such as parties or classes and are given options to interact with the characters. These options present positive, neutral, or negative interactions that the user can have with the character, allowing them to immediately view the consequences of their selection. Users are then given feedback on their choice, including an explanation of how their choice may have made the character feel, and the scenario continues, providing more opportunities for interactions and choices. We've begun user testing of both games with adults with ASD who attend Hope Services, and the data suggests that they're able to empathize and relate to the characters presented to them in the 360-degree video-based VR environment. These formats has also helped them feel more included in conversations with characters and allow them to have control over how they want the game to progress. Currently, our development and testing of these games has slowed due to COVID-19 restrictions. However, we are continuing to work with Hope Services and understanding how the effects of COVID-19 have impacted the provision of behavioral and mental health services to adults with ASD. We hope that this information will help us understand how things have changed, how technology has been supporting the transition to telehealth and remote services, and what we can do to continue helping adults with ASD, especially during these very challenging times. If you're interested in learning more about our work, our contact info is provided on this slide. Thank you.
That was great. Thanks so much. Do folks have questions directly about this project before we open it up to more general questions for the panelists in general? I love how you used real world people and scenarios. That was cool.
There is a question from the anonymous attendee that prosocial sounds like it could also be expanded towards culture lessons for people who enjoy international travel. Is this option being considered? Tiffany would know the answer. The short answer is actually yes. So Tiffany is in the last stage of conversation with an organization called Smile Train. This is a worldwide organization that are trying to help children and adults with cleft, and also the families that are affected by family members with cleft. And they actually were very interested in both Journey to Recognition and Prosocial, but they wanted to repurpose it worldwide to help children and young adults with cleft to gain more self-confidence and to be able to express socio-emotional nuances to people around them. So the answer is, in a very convoluted way, yes, except it's for a special population at the moment.
Nice. So I see a question in the general chat. Is your lab hiring undergrad research interns for the upcoming summer?
Yes. We actually, summer is extremely busy in the lab. We have probably 2 to 3 dozens high school students interning in our lab through our UCSC summer internship program, but we also have a lot of undergraduate students working in the lab over the summer. So
Yeah.
you could contact Tiffany if you're interested in joining her project, definitely. Or if you Google up our lab, there are other projects as well that are going on over the summer.
Yes, and I imagine that's true probably for all the presenters today, if you saw something that struck your fancy. Okay, so those are kind of just giving you a taste of the incredible breadth of research in the serious games area here at UC Santa Cruz. So I thought at this point we could ask some more general questions of the panelists. I prepared a couple, so I'll just kick us off with one. And those in the audience, feel free to join in and ask things you'd like to know. So my question to the panelists is, what most excites you about the potentials for serious games and research? Is it about teaching otherwise boring stuff and kind of the engagement that games can bring? Is it the value of perspective taking? Is it giving help and context? Like, what sorts of things do you think are just the biggest potentials for serious games and thinking about their applications and potential research questions? And anyone feel free to jump in.
Sure, I guess I can start. Yeah, when I teach my serious games classes, actually one of the key things I always talk about being really important with serious games is that they allow you to fail. I think it is so critical from a research perspective and from a training perspective and just the use of them, that these games let you play scenarios, let you do things that would, be economically infeasible, like building a spaceship or a building, and see what happens. And I think that has enormous potential for exploration, both in research and just for the serious games as a whole, is really that ability to let us fail, and really, what that means when we're thinking about role playing or other scenarios and how they can help us.
Failure is exciting.
Yeah.
And then also when you, yeah, but the stakes are less high, I suppose, than in quote the real world. Sri, did you want to say something?
Yeah, from our lab's experience, a lot of the things that we do or why we create serious games is for to try to make the experience to be more playful and fun, especially when it's almost feeling like a chore, like, physical rehab after injury or after stroke, or learning socio-emotional skill. Either you can look at those sticky note, which is not very fun and not very realistic, or you could actually play in a real world scenario. So yeah, there is a lot of playful and fun aspect that motivates us to develop the serious games.
Makes a lot of sense.
For me, it's really the impact, because we did a lot of work with education, with health, and I'm seeing a lot of especially when we're working with companies, that we're able to basically go to markets that we couldn't reach just from our own lab. It's really great to see how the game can impact somebody's life from a health perspective or from educational perspective. So I feel like this is what keeps me at least going.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to also reiterate the fact that also games in general are made so that you don't really go through the first time. So the failure that Eddie was talking about is really games are made for us to try and try again until we get it. And that's what I also tell students when I go to school about programming. You don't program something right the first time. Nobody does. It's just it's part of the process. One other thing is that, so when we presented the game at different conventions like PAX East, where a lot of people come into play, the people who never thought they would try programming that try and come out very happy and very sort of have that self of accomplishment. Oh, I programmed this and it worked and I managed. And it's kind of getting things that are not accessible to people, or people that would not try otherwise, that they are more likely to try if it's a game, if it's playful, if it's more inviting.
That makes sense. So we have a couple of questions from the audience. I'm going to go with the one that sort of builds on the answers to this question, which is, how quickly do you think the users should know they failed? Should it be immediate knowledge, or should they be able to reach the end of the level or even the end of the game before learning how well they did? So certainly, maybe Sean and Eddie want to address this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a really tricky thing, and it's sort of one of the key essences of serious game design. Because if you let them go too long, there's too many potential things that could have caused the failure. So it's really hard for them to learn from their mistakes and understand. If you do it too quick, then they don't have any opportunity to explore, make hypotheses, and actually build and learn. If the game just does everything for them, that's not still good either. And you can see examples on both sides, like algebra games that basically do the math for the kids. And so all they're doing is like simple pattern matching or something, or, you know, role-playing games where you play out like an entire 100 years of history before you see what you did wrong or right, and it's really hard to see. So it's a balance, basically, and it kind of really uniquely depends on the scenario, what you're trying to teach, how convoluted the mechanics are, you know, the feedback, all these types of things that are really critical.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, here's another more general one. Can each attendee mention 3 interesting things you learned from your projects? Anybody want to dive in?
I can mention one at least. So one of the things that is coming out, at least in a lot of the projects that we have in the lab, including Maze Journey, is that even when people fail, they fail in their own way, right? There's all these individual differences in how people are behaving or learning or engaging with the game, which is kind of really interesting to see. So with the question, especially about failure, to when do we tell them that they are failing? Maybe we don't even tell them, but we show them clues where they can reflect on their own behaviors as well, because there is so much variety and you want to engage them in that kind of creative problem solving.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Other learnings, I think we might have a lot of students in the audience, so all these learnings are just going to soak up like sponges. Help them fail in more creative and interesting second order ways.
Yeah, I think a couple really interesting things with mine were how effective role playing can be. Some people actually really don't engage with it. And so there's a lot to be understood and done to make these types of interactive narratives more relatable and understandable. And that was like a big finding we saw, is that some folks just totally did not care about the game or what it was trying to convey role-playing wise. The majority did, and which is why we saw great results. But you can definitely see there's some people that type of thing is hard to reach with. And similarly, some people get really involved in it. So like when we were doing our moral reasoning assessment, people were, we would give them a scenario and ask them to, like, you know, point out the viewpoints and do all this stuff. And they would use not profane names for characters and things because they got so upset about like how unethically that character was behaving. And so it really is like a whole spectrum when it comes to this. And there's a lot to think about with that.
Yeah, it speaks to what Maggie said before about individual differences. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
So one thing that, because we work a lot with people with disabilities, is that we have to be very, very careful in conveying failure, because sometimes, you know, we should give them like more chances, or be very careful to say this was the correct answer, but you're doing great, you know, like you're almost there. It's just not exactly the emotion or that's exactly the intervention that you wanted. So I think there's a need to be quite delicate in conveying failure when it's about, you know, education or rehabilitation, because I'm like, yeah, you almost get that range of motion, you know, almost.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up the fact, I mean, I don't know anyone mentioned it explicitly in the panel so far, but it seems really clear in all cases that you are bringing up and having to handle player emotions in all cases in these learning and training and therapy games. So absolutely, it seems like something you have to be sensitive to in this work. So we have a question in the chat. If you have a favorite game, has it influenced the project you're currently working on?
For me, yeah, it definitely has been like the old school RPGs or Zelda style, like the old school Zelda or like top down kind of puzzle solving dungeons. So that definitely had a big influence on my journey.
Nice.
For me, it's kind of complex because I'm not the only one working. So I have Chaima, who has very different interests than I do. So I love Assassin's Creed series, and these are very long, and I usually just like devote 8 hours of finishing up a lot of things without interruption until I finish the level because I get really addicted to them. But most of my students do not play most of these particular games, and so we kind of negotiate different things. So we play each other's games. I have actually spent a lot of time playing Shaima's game lately because she's finishing up her last version before she puts it up and do testing with it. So I got now used to so many different types of games. There's no favorite anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily have a favorite. I actually kind of do the opposite, which is I look and play a lot of games, and I use those oftentimes as inspiration for how we could improve. For me, there's like a specific genre of like alternative controller games and like Osmo, which is this amazing like tangible toolkit for kids to learn with. And a lot of my work is thinking about, well, how can we make that more accessible? Because those are pretty expensive tools. So if we had a 3D printer that could make things on the fly, does that help? And that kind of stuff. So I use those types of things in those games as like, I like this, but how could we make it better a lot of the time?
Yeah, inspiration for innovation. That's cool. Someone in the chat has asked, how often does it happen that serious games can embed measuring short-term impact inside the gameplay itself? I can see in May's journey, performance of some levels was used in impact. I know you all do this kind of stuff in your work, so.
Yeah, we also definitely use also how like our measures and data to find out where players struggle the most, where we have so like we added some, for example, in between levels in those to have like, this is maybe like a really steep learning curve and we have to adapt to that. Or we definitely try to like make sure also like, oh, this doesn't flow right, and or this became too linear and we have to branch out a bit and things like that.
Nice.
And and we use like the evidence-centered design developed by Shoot and other researchers. So it helps us find out if they're failing in this level, we know exactly what construct it is, what kind of things they're struggling with. So it helps us identify issues more quickly.
Very good. Anybody else want to add in-game metrics strategies?
We embedded a bunch of biofeedback, like galvanic skin response, heart rate, pupil dilation in some of our games. But that sometimes, we'll obviously have to ask for their permission for recording all of those things. But that can usually give immediately kind of like the impact of the game on a very short-term notice, like real time basically. But yeah.
So we have a question specifically about the ASD game, which is, I may have missed it, but in the ASD game, were there situations where the player's choice was unimportant?
So no, each choice that the player made really would reflect on the type of social consequence that would be presented, right? So for example, if someone walks up to you and says, hi, my name is so-and-so, and you has the option to either respond with an introduction of yourself or to ignore them, those clearly teach about what the social consequences of each of those choices are. So we definitely tried to make sure that we were using all of those opportunities to really teach about what the social consequences would be.
And then this is a follow-on. I think you directly mentioned, Tiffany, that the pandemic affected your ability to test your games, but I guess someone was wondering, is this true for others? Has it affected your ability to test your games and collect data on their effectiveness? I'm seeing a lot of head nods.
It makes it extremely difficult, actually.
Yeah.
Because when you can instrument them like people are like asking about, and look at that. But at the end of the day, we're kind of then sending the game off to someone and hoping they're playing it right. We can't monitor it. There's a lot of like limitations to compared to how we would normally do these types of things with a lab study, but we're still able to make it work, which is nice.
In our case, we were working with schools, and so that kind of was a big impact. It's not just access to students, it's also access to teachers who got like bombarded by so many things, and we still don't have access to teachers yet because of they are just overloaded with the many things that they have to deal with as the pandemic started and as it's hopefully ending now.
Yes, yes. Research, a new day for research is dawning. Okay, so one more question in the general chat, or actually there's two now. So one is, do you have risk and reward built into your games? If so, how do you accommodate the individual play styles and abilities? So I think this is great. It circles back to these individual differences and how do you design for that?
So if I can speak to May's journey, we don't really have risk, but we do have some rewards. So we do have like extra things that you can do. You don't have to do to finish the game, but there are extra levels and extra some sort of Easter eggs here and there that if you do, you get more narrative, more lore, or more things to do. But we do not have any risky behavior.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I have another game that was not presented. Right, that was not Tiffany's, but we actually embedded risk and reward just because of the nature of the therapy. So we deal with stroke survivor with hemiparesis, which means weakness on one side, and the therapy requires that you exercise the weak side and just not use the strong side all the time, like to eat or to lift stuff. So we created a game that if they use the weak side, they will get the reward. And if they don't use the weak side, they got not punished, because we are very careful as well with the word punishment, but they get something like a third of the score. And then the game gets faster if they use the strong side. So in a way, there is also the risk and reward. Of course, using the strong side, they will be able to catch the target quicker and more accurately, but they will risk getting lower score and the game becomes faster. so it actually was quite a lot of fun. And then when we interview post game, people would have different strategies. They would say like, well, I'm almost at the finish line, so I'm just going to use my strong side, or kind of like, well, I don't care about the score. I really just want to get better. So I don't care if I get like, very, very crappy scores.
Yeah. And Eddie, I'm imagining people getting kicked out of school if they play your game wrong. Like, how risky was it to do bad research?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have that, but I think it's more of a in that particular case, it's totally like we let you do it in the game so that you don't do it in real life, kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So not so much risk reward balance, is just, you could totally screw this up here, but please don't do it with actual participants and people.
That's a good point.
And just to speak to the other part of the question about individual differences and accommodating these and abilities, I think it's this is a topic that is important for a lot of us because we want our games to be broader, right? And to engage many different people, different age groups, and maybe even different abilities. Maybe they played games before, maybe they didn't. And so they have different kinds of expertise and abilities. And maybe they also have different types of abilities physically as well as cognitively. And so how do you approach that in design is an interesting question. And we do a lot of play testing with different people so that we can make sure that we are accommodating different people. But in the very beginning of the design, we can also do a lot of, like being sensitive to these different topics so that it become a little bit more inclusive in your design, and not just have like one way, but we have different ways of solving different puzzles, for example, in May's journey, or going to different paths in the game.
That's great. So we have one last question. I think it's particularly for the Maze Journey panelists. Did you encounter or take any influence from the game Hack and Slash? In that game, you can manipulate the variables and traits of things nearby to progress.
Yeah, I actually learned about hack and slash after I started developing Maze Journey, but definitely I wanted to check it out to see how it's like. I think, so I really like the concept, the narrative also about that game. And I think the main difference is that for Maze Journey, we're really trying to get the educational part right, as opposed to hack and slash, which is more free form, do your own kind of thing. I didn't finish the game, to be fair, so I only played for about an hour. But I think in Maze Journey, it's more structured and it's more trying to follow a sort of learning path where we teach these constructs in this particular order and letting players practice with them in different ways. So I think that's probably the main difference.
Fair enough. All right, so looks like that's the questions. I want to thank everybody for taking part in this panel, and I want to encourage you all in the audience to keep an eye on the center's website for future interesting and exciting virtual panels. And the website also has links to all the faculty. So if you were curious about any of this research, or you sleep on it, and you're dying to be a summer intern in one of these labs, please reach out to these folks. I can vouch for them being wonderful mentors in addition to being wonderful researchers. And with that said, I think we will call it a Wednesday evening. So thanks to everybody.